Ready to stop spinning your wheels and start moving your business forward? You're in the right place. On each episode of Accelerate to Achieve, we'll discuss a crucial step in the journey, offering tips and advice that you can apply immediately within your own company. From financial management to customer success to digital transformation, we'll cover it all while providing leadership lessons from top industry insiders. In just 15 minutes, you'll be inspired to build momentum through action and achieve incredible results. Welcome to Accelerate to Achieve, the podcast that moves you from question to answer and idea to execution. Hello, and welcome back to the latest edition of the Accelerate to Achieve podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Walther, the founder of Parrels Advisory. From a societal and economic perspective, we employ and rely upon a model ingrained in learning and growth. In fact, our higher education system is the envy of many globally. Why then does it seem like so many people believe our learning stops when we leave the classroom? Countless individuals find themselves in work environments where they're expected to just get on with it, often with little or no guidance. Now, for frequent listeners of the podcast, you might recognize our current guest. He's actually our first return presenter, and I'm so happy to have Dave McWilliams join us today. As the Vice President of Employee Benefits at Johnson, Kendall & Johnson, he's responsible for growing the company's benefits practice through strategic consulting and partnering with mid to large-sized employer groups developing holistic risk management approaches. Dave, thank you so much for joining us today.
Ryan, I appreciate being back on again. It's great. Looking forward to the conversation.
Now, kind of leading into this concept of sort of a static place and one that's constantly changing and dynamic, if we look at that latter situation, what really makes working through that change and that dynamic workplace different than when you're in a situation where something never happens or change never happens and every day is just the same, every situation is the same?
Well, it feels right now in the current landscape like we're in that every day is the same. However, it seems like we're getting out of that related to the pandemic. But back to your question, I think it's something now that with a constant change, you have a different market in which you're going to that is constantly evolving. So it creates change in yourself, your business, your team, your staff, that they have to adapt and change. And so I think that's always a good thing. Change is always good. I know a lot of people say the opposite to that, but I believe change is good because it creates awareness. It creates what I believe is the ability to combat what ultimately drives people to not be successful, which is kind of comfortability, right? So if nothing changes over time, people get stuck in their ways and they get comfortable. So the opposite to that, I believe, is when change does occur, it creates new learning exercises, new ways to go about finding success, which ultimately creates a little bit of chaos in a way that's good for everyone and everyone that's surrounded with that business or that team.
So if we look a little bit to the side then here, and we look at those responsible or those who kind of take the mantle then of trying to lead others forward through any situation, what are some of the key characteristics those people need to have in order to be successful and in order to really encourage others to follow them?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think the characteristics of a leader, sometimes those are really true characteristics that people are ultimately born with in some cases, but in other cases, there are folks that have been around leaders and them themselves have kind of been mentored into a leader and taken some of those characteristics with them. I think, some of the really true characteristics to get somebody to follow a leader is simply doing what you're preaching And that being, in a sales world, I've seen it multiple times. You have those who have essentially carried a bag before, who have built up a successful career and found themselves in some sort of management role or leadership role in which they don't sit back and just push their team to create results. They actually lead by example, and they roll up their sleeves and they help those folks. So I think it's not only those who can lead, but those who can listen as well, and then help from a solution standpoint. More often than not, you find those leaders are the ones that they see a problem, their team has a problem, and they can help in a collaborative approach create a solution to alleviate that problem. So I think first and foremost, it's those who are vocal, but also those who listen. It's those who can really find a solution, but don't look at it as my solution's the only solution. They work as a collaborative approach. And then also they're the ones that allow their team to take credit for success and sort of step aside. I think sometimes when you're in a leadership role, egos become sort of the Achilles heel at times, and those characteristics are ones that look to build up their team versus the opposite. So I would say there are a handful of characteristics right off the bat that you tend to see in a leadership role, and those who take kind of that team approach more often than not, they tend to be leaders, whatever kind of walk of life.
So I think it was really interesting what you brought up there, and I'd like to evaluate something kind of in that vein a little deeper. And that is, we often see the individuals in roles of responsibilities who are kind of just managing to the metrics. And what they know is how to track activity levels and forecasts, and that's about it. So how is someone who kind of takes on this role, perhaps in a way that they're looking to more lead through change and lead the team to something different than someone who is really just kind of managing to the metric?
Yeah, I think it's a dilemma, and it's a great question. The dilemma in that is a lot of times, it just my personal experience, but also seeing this in just different kind of industries is data speaks, right? The data doesn't lie, and sometimes just managing through metrics sometimes gets lost in really the core values of success, of growing a team and actually being successful. And what I mean by that is those who manage by metrics sometimes tend to have their heads down into a spreadsheet, and then when problems do occur or issues or a challenge that may occur, they're unable to kind of adapt and pivot because they're so focused on the end result versus what leads up to that end result. And so I think that's where groups and companies sometimes get lost when they have some significant growth. And, a prime example may be a company that has a few successful early in their tenure. They have some reps that end up having success, helping grow the business to the next level, but they ultimately promote them to a management role. And those folks, for lack of better experience, may not be in a true management role, but they're asked now to kind of just manage metrics. And what ends up happening there is you have that next group of sales that come in and they want to be sort of groomed and understand the business, but that management team is solely focused on managing the metrics. And so you get that leadership lacks a lot of times because you're now not leading by example. You're really just leading to find results, and results through metrics sometimes doesn't work unless you have a fundamental practice of someone who can lead from beginning to end, and not necessarily hand-holding, but just being able to help effectively make changes and get through situations. And I've experienced it personally, seeing leaders that would manage through metrics and those who would manage just through sheer leadership and collaborative approach. And I would say the latter tends to motivate and help your team be successful than the opposite, because when you're just being asked to provide forecasting metrics and no real solutions to challenges or questions, you tend to have people check out. And that, I believe, is a lot of times what ends up happening when companies grow so quickly. They go for the first is, let's find some people who can help us manage and predict our numbers. But they realize very quickly when they're not hitting their goals why that may be, because they really need sort of that balancing act. They need more leaders than they do managers in that sense.
I guess one thing then would be, often we see perhaps that a challenge or a problem is happening when it's too late. It's really the end result. And we just notice that, targets weren't hit or we're not where we need to be. And then at that point, perhaps you don't know the underlying reason. So what do you see sometimes as maybe the common indicators or things that highlight that really the right things aren't being done? And what kind of gives you the clue, or where do you look to find those things?
I think number one is results, right? I think in business, it's a results world. In sports, it's a results world, right? So you can use those two equally in terms of when things aren't working, and then looking and peeling back and saying, okay, what is it that's not working? I think quickly in business, you find that if sales are down, well, why is that? Well, you can measure that based off of some metrics and some forecasting. But if you really look back to that whole dynamic of a leader versus a manager, sometimes those folks who are responsible for driving business in a sales or business development capacity, they're struggling because of maybe there's a change. And right now, the pandemic could be a great sort of measuring stick, because last year, a lot of industries didn't make wholesale changes. So obviously sales were flat or decreased. And for those who increased, they obviously were doing something right. But when it's not going well, it's pretty clear. And maybe not always pretty clear, but for the most part, it's clear in efforts and responses. And so I think that's where a leader really comes into play. When you have someone who can adapt and pivot to your first question about, now that things have changed, for those who have kind of sat back and stuck to their ways in the landscape, which has changed, they're going to find themselves very quickly behind the eight balls. For those who have realized, okay, we have to adapt to a new world. And the best way to put that is now a lot of things are done virtual. So those who were hesitant about selling or conducting business virtually and waited 4 or 5 months, they're behind already. So I think very quickly you can find a lot of those challenges, and it doesn't need, you don't need a leader to kind of tell you what those issues are, but you do need a leader who can say, okay, here's our struggles, here's a plan in place, and we're going to execute on this plan. But it's not just my plan, it's everyone's plan collaboratively. And I think that will end up hopefully writing, those issues and leading towards a change that's effectively going to help increase whatever challenge that may be, to get some success. And so hopefully that's pretty quickly defined. But if groups can't define that, Ryan, then I think they're in some trouble, right? It should be right in front of them. It's just putting together a solution to ultimately clear that challenge.
No, I think that's really pragmatic. And sort of as we draw things to a close, I wanted to ask you, if I take something from the perspective of an owner or someone responsible for the entire company, and we're not just talking sales, we're talking sort of end-to-end responsibility, what advice would you give to them if they feel like they are struggling perhaps in the sales domain, it's not going where it's supposed to go, or just have a desire to do better, and they're not really in it day to day? What advice do you have as a way to begin? What should they be doing? What should they be thinking about? Where do they start first?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I don't think I have all the answers, and nor would I have any answers that would be the end all answer. But I think one of the common denominators when you find those who are not in the front lines is to entrench themselves in the front lines, to listen to their organization, to be a springboard for whether it's change or just having an open mind to those folks who are dealing with the struggles in the front lines. And I think, a lot of times in sort of the startup world, you see this happen more often than not, where the founder or CEO has a great idea or a great concept, and is able to scale the business at a certain reflection point. But then over time, they maybe are less involved as that company grows in the day-to-day of the sales. And so I think it's always good to kind of put yourself back in that position to listen to those folks who are in the front lines, who are dealing with the challenges. Because when you get a group of people together, and regardless of what sort of seniority they have, if you can work collaboratively and listen and bounce ideas, you can really come up with a lot of good reasons to be successful. But I think what ultimately that increases is a great culture to work for. And I think sometimes as groups grow so quickly, they forget that culture drives that. And so I would just say that just seeing when owners start to struggle a little bit, maybe they've reached a point in time where their business can't grow any further. It's going back to that team and to those folks, and really listening to everybody, and coming together and finding the solution that's going to, drive for better success. And I think not losing touch of that sometimes could be just the answer that's needed in a challenging time, is going back to that initial stage and going back to that team who's there, and trying to find ways to lead by that example. And I think leading sometimes isn't necessarily doing, it's listening. It could be the number one reason for why folks can lead is just to be a listener. And to me, that almost outweighs doing. So I think that would be one of the key advices, is just, listening to those employees, and never losing sight of, even the smallest employee, and the youngest tenured employee sometimes may have the best ideas, right? So it's just being flexible in that sense.
Now that's wonderful, and I think it really applies across the board. And it's something, no matter what's going on, people can take to heart. I think also, the ability, when you're in an environment that changes, to just keep your finger on the pulse of things, to understand what's going on. Because if you, from the onset, believe and understand that things will change, your assumptions can't continue to carry forward, because as you get farther and farther from that initial point, they're going to be farther and farther from the actual reality. So I think that's a great way to really wrap things up and kind of sends the point home. And I'd love to thank you for being our first return guest, and we really appreciate you coming back and joining us today and sharing so much with us.
Well, Ryan, I appreciate the opportunity to come back again. And this is a great topic, very passionate about leadership and change for that matter. So really appreciate the dialogue today.
With the stakes so high, doesn't it just make sense that the environment and model people work in should encourage those in roles of responsibility to shepherd and grow individuals in their purview? Perhaps we need to take a closer look at how we evaluate and reward, because in many cases, the emphasis is just in the wrong place. I'd like to thank Dave for joining us again. As our first return presenter, he's covered a very diverse and rich set of topics. Thank you for listening today. I look forward to joining you on the next episode. Until then, I'm Ryan Walter, and remember that solving your biggest business problems begins when you decide to accelerate your approach and achieve more.
At Parrels Advisory, our focus is your business's future. Having the right insight, experience, and perspective makes all the difference when tackling far-reaching issues within your company. We are here to simplify the steps, unlock your potential, and move you forward, making your vision a reality. We've helped startups achieve massive growth, mid-sized businesses navigate digital transformation, and enterprises embrace innovation. Wondering how to jumpstart your business and move it forward? Contact us to discuss your audacious goals during a complimentary consultation. Thank you for listening to this episode of Accelerate to Achieve. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen. Don't forget to share the show with others who want more for their businesses. Got a question, feedback on the program, or interested in being a guest? Simply go to parrels.co/A2A-podcast and send us a message. That's parrels.co/A2A-podcast. To learn more about our work or to book a consultation, visit us at parrels.co/contact. Until next time, remember that solving your biggest business problems begin when you decide to accelerate your approach and achieve more.